Opera is an art form that traffics easily in mythology, but The Passenger, written in the late 1960s, after the passing of this unbelievable, horrendous, barbaric period of history, is the only piece of Holocaust art that, number one, was written by people who were there, and number two, tries not to depict the situation in a mythological way, as opera normally does, but tries to paint a sound landscape that has an emotional truth. The Passenger tells the story of a German civil servant after the war, and she and her husband are retiring to South America, and they are leaving Germany from Hamburg on a ship, and their first night out, Lisa and her husband encounter a passenger who is a person who she thought she had sent to the death block in Auschwitz.
Zofia Posmic was a prisoner in Auschwitz for 3 years, and after she survived and became a journalist, about 10 years later began to digest this experience and to imagine what would happen if she was suddenly face to face with her SS overseer. And out of that thought, she wrote a radio play and a novel.
Zachowywali się tak, jakby obóz dla nich nie istniał. A może przeczuwali, że to ich ostatnie widzenie?
Those two things were then filmed by a famous
sentymenty.
Polish filmmaker, Munch, and that text was reproduced in a Russian magazine, and Shostakovich saw that text and brought it to the attention of Weinberg and a dramaturg at the Bolshoi Theatre called Medvedev, and he made it into an opera. And the opera was suppressed by the Soviet authorities for some 30 years and was finally premiered in Bregenz in 2010.
I know what you are offering, but I do not accept.
It's a great piece, it's a wonderful piece of music. And, you know, having lifted the lid on Weinberg, you suddenly look in and there's such a cornucopia of works sitting there. And then there's some rather wonderful personal stories. I mean, of course, my story of meeting Miss Posmic, who wrote the original play and the book on which the libretto was based, and her taking me round Auschwitz and being able to point to a bunk and saying, that's where I slept. This is the room, in this tiny room in which I worked as the bookkeeper with the overseer whose character is now here in this opera. So I kind of touched somehow the people in this opera quite closely. And then, of course, as I got to know the music, I realized also how very perceptive Weinberg had been in, I think, two ways. One is restraint, which is not the first word you usually use about an opera composer. You know, you kind of think that the business of opera is kind of piling on the emotional pressure and you know, getting it out there in a really grand, loud, engulfing kind of way. And it's the fact that Weinberg treats it with such quiet sensitivity and allows the story to speak for itself that is very intelligent. And also I think what he gets in doing that is this very frightening sense of timelessness, which is the sort of basic condition of prison life, really. As a magically beautiful, reflective piece of music. I mean, it's not protesting, it's not wearing its heart on its sleeve, it's just letting it sink in. Oh my goodness, we've arrived in Auschwitz, you know. I'm sitting in the theatre and here is Auschwitz.
It's interesting that Zofia Posmic herself, the author of the novel of The Passenger, said when she first heard the opera that she didn't think anyone could ever capture the experience of what not a day in Auschwitz was like, but what 15 minutes in Auschwitz was like. She said you didn't try to think about surviving for a day. You tried to think about how to get through the next 15 minutes.
The fact that what you're witnessing is a human story about two young girls. They're both 18 or 19, and one of them is a prisoner and the other is an overseer. And these girls should have met in a university canteen and squabbled about a boyfriend, helped one another with their essay. But this university is called Auschwitz, and one is on one side of the line and the other's on the other. Even this hell is a human story. It's a story about human beings. And the narrow difference that separates a human being that's doing the right thing and a human being that's doing the wrong thing. That's the role of art, is to look at the most difficult subjects and to give us a means of having an emotional rather than a purely factual interaction with those difficult subjects.
It doesn't ask us to tell each other why or how could this happen. All it asks of us is that we remember that this happened. One question, one thing, one demand: remember.